I want to start by saying I got tears in my eyes during that last presentation, the last two. My daughter went to school at UBC and she took a class on indigenous healing. And she told me something that has stuck with me and I use all the time at my work, is that culture is medicine. And I work with a lot of traumatized communities. The African-American community where I live has been through incredible hardship. And I use that term, I think about that often. So it's a traditional wisdom that's made its way to the United States and to different cultures. And that's something I hold on to and want to thank people for. Thank you for the wonderful talks. I'm going to talk about the healing power of the natural world, which relates well to this last two topics. And I think it's something that we all appreciate. It's sort of, of course you feel good when you're outside, but I think we've not paid attention to that to the extent that we should, especially when we're looking with people who are really suffering. And I'm going to start by telling you a story. A few years ago, a couple of years before the pandemic, I got to this point in my career where I felt like I could do the pills and the procedures, but there was something I wasn't doing for my patients. There's things that I knew were useful, things that I would want, that I wasn't offering my patients. And so I did a little research and came up with this what I called a prescription for health and happiness. So this little pad that I could use, and I would write people prescriptions for non-medical things as they were leaving the hospital. So one day I walked into this patient's room, this halfway through the pandemic, and the guy said, "Dr. Haas, it's Mr. Washington. I'm so glad to see you again." I'm like, I didn't recognize this guy. I'm like, oh, I sort of pretended like I recognized him, right? How that is. He goes, "You know, that prescription you gave me saved my life. I don't think I've ever would have made it through the pandemic without that prescription you gave me a few months ago." And I'm scratching my head thinking, did I prescribe to him an antibiotic or is it a diuretic? And I was sort of nodding my head. And then he said, "Yeah, that prescription you gave me to ride my bike down and watch the sunset. I never would have made it out of the pandemic without that. I was so depressed. I couldn't get out of bed. And that's how I ended up in the hospital. And that prescription is just what I needed." And then I still never did picture him, but it warmed my heart to hear that. We had a great rest of his encounter. I was able to help him in ways that I wouldn't if there hadn't been that kind of trust. But it made me, leaving the room, think, boy, I need to think more about this being outside being good for you. I had imagined that, being outside is good for you. I'd read about that. And maybe in a guy like me, my well-being score, I go from a 5.9 on a Likert score to a 6.3 if I went outside regularly. I just didn't have the idea that I might be saving someone's life. So here's an example of the kind of prescription I write. And here's the prescription I wrote. This is a different one, but what I wrote to this Mr. Washington was ride your bike and watch the sunset. So I gave him a prescription to get outside and take in the natural beauty. And so as I started to look into this, what I realized was that, this is ancient wisdom. Clearly, it's in indigenous cultures' wisdom to find healing in nature. But even going back to the beginning of Western culture, Aristotle wrote about walking around the walls of Athens is healing. And Darwin talked about it, Virginia Woolf, Einstein. So great thinkers have been thinking about it for years, but somehow it avoided the medical world. Frederick Law Olmsted, who is this designer and architect who designed Central Park in New York, and this is Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. He wrote, "Nature employs the mind without fatigue and yet exercises it. It tranquilizes it, yet enlivens it, and thus through the influences of mind over body, gives the effect of refreshing rest and invigorating the system as a whole." And what we found, it took more than 100 years before health researchers started to investigate, but this is exactly what they found. As I was preparing this subject and learning about it and reading about it, I was always shouting to my wife. She's an epidemiologist at UCSF and is good at data and good at being skeptical of studies. And I would say, oh, hey, if you live near a forest, you might live longer. Oh, if you go for a walk in a pretty place, you may have less knee pain. And she said, Leif, you got to be careful with all these studies. These are the kind of studies that are prone to be full of biases and confounding. So you got to make sure you're not talking about things as they're a settled scientific affair on some of this skimpy data. But as I looked into it, I realized there's been thousands of studies, literally over the last few years, looking at different populations, different parts of the world, using different sensory organs, different environmental settings. There are studies about lower blood pressure coming out of Japan, lower cortisol levels, that's stress hormone levels, done by my dear friend Dr. Keltner in Yosemite National Park, lower pain scores in China, less back pain with walking in green spaces in Austria, lower length of stay in the USA, less pain living near green spaces in Great Britain. So this is just the beginning of what's a huge body of science now. And I'm going to go into some of it here with you. But where did this all start? Well, this all started with this guy, Dr. Qing Li. He is a Japanese physician who actually dropped out of his first year of medical school. He was so stressed that he just couldn't figure out how to get through. And he spent the year hiking and spending times in the woods, and he just felt better. And he decided that what he would do was dedicate his life to trying to bring this to other people and understand it and make it a legitimate part of the scientific endeavor that we carry out in medicine. In his first studies, he found that he could lower blood pressure 5 points by people spending time in natural settings. And that in fact, after an episode in the forest, they would have lower cortisol levels, stress hormone levels for days. And he also measured increased heart rate variability, which is a sign of a healthy parasympathetic tone as opposed to that stress sympathetic tone. And so working with his Japanese colleagues, they coined this term Shinru Yoku, which is the transliteration is forest bathing, or it's really sort of taking in the atmosphere of the forest. Or as Teresa would have said, it's like really being part of the forest. It's more than just sitting there. It's sort of absorbing it, absorbing the wisdom of the forest. And there are now about 100 places in Japan that are formally designated as being proven to have health effects. And it's kind of crazy. You can actually go there and they can measure your blood pressure, or they can measure your heart rate, skin tension tests they do to sort of make sure that it's helping. And now more than 25% of people in Canada, in Japan, take place in these formal forest bathing activities. It's also equally big in Korea, and it's embraced by the government as a pillar in their healthcare system. And why that is, I think it's because these places were extremely have high levels of stress. There's a word for working yourself to death in Japanese. And in Korea, they have the highest suicide rates of anywhere. I think it's very competitive, very crowded, stressed out place. But also, I think it ties back to culture. These places have deep ties to deep animistic traditions of the natural world being alive and full of spirits. And I think in Japan, there's really nothing more sacred than these cedar forests. And these trees are like deities. And so to go to these places for healing just made sense. In fact, now in both these countries, you can get a medical specialty in forest bathing and get special training on how to do this work. And it's come to the point where in both these countries, the director of forestry has a degree in social science from North America. That's just a paradigm shift, right? It does not happen in this country. I mean, can you imagine in Canada if the The director of forestry was a psychologist, not someone who studied trees per se. I got lucky enough to make a trip to Japan, and this is me and these a trip I did to the sacred forest, and I get goosebumps just looking at these trees now. And my hosts were like, they were bowing down with incredible humility to be around these trees. This is going forward on its own for some reason. I'm not quite sure, but I'll backtrack here. So this was a Japanese forest. What I'm going to talk about now is how all senses are involved in this process of the healing power of the natural world. Smell, as I said, the cedars are sacred. And one of the first studies they did in Japan was they said, the smell of these things, it has to be good for people. So they put people in hotel rooms in Tokyo, and they infused overnight the scent, the extracts from these cedar trees. And what they found was that compared to a placebo odor, that people reported sleeping better. And not only that, they had measurably lower levels of stress throughout the following day, simply from intaking this stress levels overnight. Over these essential oils overnight. And there's real sort of biochemical reasons why. It seems like these molecules may have some immune function. They have some antifungal functions. So I think there's actually triggering something in the body's immune system and in the nervous system to lead to these effects. And there's been work done showing that we can lower stress levels at nurses' stations by infusing lavender during the workday. We're primarily visual creatures. So vision is a great way for us to partake in the natural world. And there was a great study done a few years ago at Vanderbilt University by this cardiothoracic surgeon there, who had this feeling that the patients of his who were on the wing of the hospital that faced this forest did better than those who were on the other side of the hospital, where there was the view of a parking garage. And he looked at the length of stay, and people who had this better view did a little bit better in the hospital. And if you ever wonder why hospitals have always these kind of corny pictures of waterfalls and streams and mountains, it's because in the world of design, it's recognized that these images have healing effects. It's recognized in the world of urban design and in public health, but it never made it to my medical training. And so I think it's time that we acknowledge that these things are important and try to bring them to a greater extent into our work environments. And so, yes, it's good to be in these natural settings, but simply viewing them can help. Sound. So there's a guy named Joshua Smith at Penn State who did some great work in this regard. He put people in a functional MRI. So it's an MRI where you can actually take real-time pictures to see where the brain is using energy. And they found that if they put on bird calls, this relaxing part of the nervous system would light up. But if they put on the sound of a pager or a phone or cars, the amygdala would activate. And the amygdala is this alarm center. It's triggered by stress and by threats. And we all know that the sounds of these alarms can make you startle, make you jump. But I didn't appreciate the fact that these soothing sounds actually can light up areas in the brain, activate areas in the brain that are relaxing. And to make, so that's a kind of nice, and like you can imagine how we're going to be piping music into certain settings, but the sounds can have longer negative impact. There was a study done at Frankfurt in Germany, And this study looked at a group of schools. One was under the flight path under the airport, where there was these noisy airplanes flying over all day. And one was at a school on the other side of town, similar school, but without the noise. And they found that during the time when the airplanes were flying over the school, the kids had less attention, were learning less well. So not only did the sounds have a negative impact in terms of anxiety, they can actually have a more longer term impact on our well-being. Touch. I hope we've all had the experience of walking on the sand and how good that feels, or maybe even like walking on the duff of a forest floor. Well, there's good data that this kind of thing actually has measurable impacts on health. In fact, even working with our hands, there's was a study where people receiving palliative care were given horticultural therapy with getting their hands in the dirt and planting things, and they had lower levels of pain than people who were given other activities. So touch is another mechanism by which we can experience and have healing effects. So you don't need to be in a pristine forest for there to be healing benefits. There was a really great study done in Poland where there were 2 park benches back to back, and people who were put in the park bench and looked at the city street. I'm not sure why this is going. Is it maybe that might be me, but I don't want it to be. I'll just have to turn it back as need be. Forgive me. So if you were looking at the city, you did not receive benefits. If you turned around and looked at the park, and this was a park in winter, leaves are off the tree, kind of like in this picture here, you still had the benefits. And so people think it's not just the greenery, but it's the shape. There's a whole area of research into what are calming shapes. And there's something about the shapes of the natural world that are calming for us. So why does the natural world make us feel good? Well, there's a number of different theories about that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them right now. So the theory that gets the most attention these days is this idea of biophilia. This is Edward Wilson. He is an incredible biologist, one of my heroes, and he coined this term biophilia, not to have to do with this particularly, but just this idea that one could be in love with the natural world. And biophilia here means that the reason why the natural world is good for us is that we feel good in it, that we evolved to be in the natural world, our physiology is adapted to it. And so as we hear the sounds, the smells, the rhythms of it relax us because we're at home. We're synchronized with these rhythms. There's people who take this idea even further. The extent to which you're synchronized and in tune and draw comfort and are drawn into the natural world, evolutionarily will make you more likely to succeed and be able to live in the natural world. So there may be some biological advantage to this idea of biophilia. That the more the well-being you can draw, the more you can see and understand and gather from the world, the healthier you're going to be. So restoration theory. So the science behind well-being in the natural world actually didn't start with Queen Lee. He was the first one to take it to medicine. It began earlier. It began at University of Wisconsin with this couple named the Kaplans. And they did some work where looking at people with anxiety, they noticed that these images led to lower levels of anxiety. And from their work blossomed this whole field where people now do this work in social sciences, planning, health, and so on. And from their early work, they had this idea that what they call the attention restoration theory, that the natural world benefited people because when we see these images, there's what they call a soft fascination. They're comforting, they're somehow enticing, but they're not demanding. They fit our aesthetic, which would go along with the biophilia. And there's somehow a little mystery that draws us in. And that basically this sort of soft fascination somehow lets our brain recover. I think the 21st century version of that is a little more nuanced or a little more sophisticated in terms of understanding of the cognitive networks. So there's this idea of the executive function in default mode network. So executive function is sort of the planning and task oriented. And it's kind of what we do as we go through the day. And we're like, okay, do I have my phone? Do I have my wallet? Do I have my key? I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And the default node network is this free ranging, daydreaming part of our body. And when we're in nature, it's this free ranging part of our body that really is in play. And that's the part of our body that gets activated in the natural world. There's another theory, which I've called the emotional theory. It's the, for lack of a better word, I guess we call it awe. This is a theory that's been espoused by my dear friend and colleague, Dr. 𝐒𝐂𝐂𝐑𝐈𝐁𝐄. And give me a moment as I recharge my phone computer here. Right here. I'm actually in Croatia, if you can believe it right now. I'm on an extended leave from work in Croatia. Anyway, awe. So this is the idea that part of what makes the natural world healing is that this idea that we find nature awesome. And awe is this feeling of wonder that we get when we are in the presence of something greater or beyond our normal understanding or experience. So the physiology of awe is that when we are experiencing awe, the sympathetic nervous system is turned on. We get a decreased heart rate. We get increased heart rate variability. All things that people have measured as being useful when we are experiencing awe or experiencing the natural world. With awe, you get this pathognomonic physiological response, piloerection or goosebumps. And I'm sure everyone here has had that experience where they've heard an amazing speech or seen something really beautiful and got goosebumps. Well, that's when you're experiencing awe. You can kind of feel it in your body. And there's this immune system effects related to awe as well. But there's a human side to awe as well. So this is the part that's less intuitive, that when we're experiencing awe or after we have, people are more cooperative. They're more curious. They're more generous. Awe gets us out of our heads and makes us feel like we're part of something better. And it has this role of social integration. So it's a bit ironic that the natural world may actually have some of its healing effects by making us better in the social world that we live in. But that may be what's going on, right? That you just think less about yourself, concern less about your own worries. And that's one of the things I think would be really helpful in the pain world. I think people who have a lot of pain sometimes can get stuck in their own heads. And I think that the natural world and experiencing awe is one way to get a little less in our heads. And that might make it easier to deal with our pain. And when, with big awe experience, there's this like transcendence, that happens, this feeling like of elevation, of like otherworldliness, of meeting with some higher being. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, all mean egotism vanishes. I am a transparent eyeball. I am nothing, right? Where you just feel small and almost gone in this sort of vast world of greater significance and importance. It's an amazing feeling. And we can get some of that and get out of our pain and get out of our heads with spectacular natural images. Let me tell you another quick story here. I had this patient a few months ago who was admitted to the hospital with abdominal pain. What I saw the next day, her pain was gone. And I've learned over the years dealing with pain is that, I need to see what's going on with people's lives. I said, so Miss J, can you tell me what makes you happy? She said, well, I love gardening, but I lost my garden. I don't get around very well. I have an apartment, and I had these window boxes, or these boxes set outside on the terrace, and I had spices growing in them and herbs, and I had a tomato plant, and then the landlord took them down because it was a fire hazard, and I've just been kind of depressed since then. I've been able to get out so much, and so her pain was in part due to the fact that she lost her garden here. And I acknowledged that, and I worked with my social worker, and I couldn't get her garden back. We gave her resources on here's a bus you might take to get to Lake Merritt, where you might be able to sit and look at the sunset and take in the lake. And here's a program for community garden. And I didn't really get to the heart of her. I couldn't give her the resources that she might like, but by asking the right questions, I was able to identify a need, maybe get her outside, and help her recognize that having her hands in the dirt and being in contact with the living world in this way could be healing. And that brings up this greater idea that where we live and how things are situated can have a big impact on health. There's been research going back for more than 25 years that if there is green spaces near housing developments, low-income housing projects in the States, there can be less violence. And they now have worked green spaces into housing developments in the UK after they found that people appeared to live longer if they had readily available green spaces, and that healthcare costs are lower in people who have readily access to green spaces. So what does our colleagues who've been doing this work say about pain? There's been more research about sort of well-being and blood pressure and less about pain, but there's a good body of research now. Mass and colleagues early on did this work about green spaces in pain. Huber is in Austria and did work on people with back pain and found that a walking exercise program through green spaces decreased back pain and increased quality of life. Han did this ambitious study in Korea where they had people who were out on leave who worked for the city of Seoul with chronic back pain, and they did a forest bathing weekend program, and they had measurable decreased pain and increased quality of life after that. And as I mentioned before, Kim and all did this work about horticultural therapy causing decreased pain scores in hospice patients. So the question may be like, at this point, I imagine you're thinking, yes, this sounds good, but what should I prescribe and how should I do that? And I think that's going to continue to be the question, but I think what's important for us is to first start doing things ourselves and then trying it out with patients. We did a preliminary study at Sutter Health where we rolled out these prescriptions for people, I should say, we rolled them out to providers. And if providers were interested in using them, they could try them out with their patients. What we found is that the providers felt better themselves handing these things out. Not only did their patients like them, but they felt better themselves. And then on top of that, what we found was that they were more likely to do the activities themselves. So if you start prescribing getting outside to your patients, chances are you'll get outside more yourself. And as busy providers, how do we do that, right? Sort of hard enough. Oh my God, you got to go to the gym. I got to take the kids out, and I got this and that. I think a lot of us found during the pandemic is that we managed to get outside because there's nothing else to do. And I hope that people can hold on to some of those. I used to be someone who spent time at a gym, and I've now become an open water swimmer. I can tell you that I'm not going to ever swim in a pool again if I have the chance. And the idea of going to a gym when I can be outside, swimming in San Francisco Bay while the sun's going down, it's incredible. So what I would say, if you're trying to figure out how to get outside yourself, would be try to bring the kids along, bring a friend, do exercises, but make time for yourself to get outside if you want to be a good proponent for it. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of Dr. Melissa Lem. She is from British Columbia, and her work helped get this prescription for national parks approved by the various health boards in Canada. Her organization is called PARK, very cute, P-A-R-K, Parks. And this is what she recommends about what to prescribe and how to do it. She says, just think of being outside as a fourth pillar. Well, if you want to be healthy, you need to get a good night's sleep, you need exercise, you need sleep, and you need to get outside. So it's the fourth pillar of health. And personalize it. So think about what's going to work. Spend the time to figure out what a person might do and prescribe that. And then actually work with the patient on scheduling it. Like before they leave, like how are you going to schedule it? How are you going to fit it in your busy day? And then make sure you follow up and then be the agent for change. So what I would like is if someone could tell me like, okay, I walked into a room, what is the right therapy for my person that I'm working with right now? What outdoor therapy should I prescribe? But it's just going to be too complicated for that ever to be what we can do, right? People have different mental conditions, physical health, personality, culture, resources, environment. So don't wait for like the study that's going to say, okay, my patient with stage 4 lymphoma who has, diabetic neuropathy, the thing to prescribe is X. So what I've heard is using the term adaptive learning. So this adaptive learning approach, basically see what people like, see what works. There's not much downside. Partner with your patients, figure out what's going to work for them. There's a study out of Ireland where people want to get outside. The majority of people who have chronic pain are agreeable to the idea of therapy in some outdoor setting. But so as a consensus of what we might be doing in the long term, this is what I've come up with. There's a dose response to being outside. So really more is better. As a minimum, what people are saying is you should shoot to have people outside for 5 hours a month. If people have the resources, they have the money, if they could get away for 3 days, they don't need to be in a tent, but if they could have their phone turned off and no electronics for 3 days, a few times a year, that can really give people a boost. And beyond the walks outside or sitting in a park, you could bring some of the natural world into our lives. There's data on just having a lot of plants in your living space being good for you. Micro breaks. So just look out the window or open the window, or even just take a break from the computer and look at Richard Attenborough, Planet Earth for a few minutes as a work break. And try for short walks every day, even if it's just up and down the street, just the fresh air. As I said, even videos in photos work for people. By the way, this is I didn't talk about this, but if anyone's interested in getting these types of prescriptions, I can tell you how I did it. It's just been a total joy to be able to give these to my patients. And I think giving people a written prescription as opposed to telling them, everything we do is electronic now, but I still get this is a written prescription. It's really been fabulous. So, any thoughts, any questions?
Well, thanks for making a pivot to making your presentation a little bit shorter. We don't want to take away from the wonderful information you have, Dr. Haas. And am I saying your last name right, by the way?
Well, everyone says it the wrong way, so you're in good company.
Please tell me how I can say it better.
Haas. But it took my wife 5 years to figure that one out. But Haas was fine.
Haas, very good. Okay, well, I'm Christelle. It's really nice to meet you. We do have a few questions, and I think we'll have time for one if that's okay. So first and foremost, being able to have a written prescription, there's something to be said about something handing to someone else. And so just really appreciate the innovation. And like I said, when I discovered you on one of the wonderful email newsletters that I get, I was like, this is very fascinating. And we're so appreciative of your time if you're in Croatia. So thank you for joining us. You're a little dark, but hopefully we can see you still. So I will
the sun is set. I'll step outside.
get some sunshine if it's setting. Obviously you can't get some sunshine, but yeah, I'll just refer to the question here. I think the key thing that folks are curious about in this instance is, what's your best advice to someone who does not consider this part of typical medicine? So despite the evidence, so how would you the naysayers, how would you overcome that barrier and say, just try it?
Well, is the naysayer the patient or the provider?
Both.
Well, the providers are just like the data are there, right? And also, give me a break and give some ibuprofen and think it's going to help their pain. Come on, that doesn't work, right? You wouldn't do that. I mean, maybe you might work it for yourself, but I think there's data are solid. Multi modality is the way to go, and I think that. Just as there are other things to be prescribed as providers, I think that it's a fun thing to prescribe patients as well. And for the patients, I think you just need to say that, you need an enthusiastic provider, that these things work. This is going to be good for you as anything. I get outside, sit in your yard. I make families wheel my patients when they've discharged to skilled nursing out to the courtyard. I sort of make them a pledge. I want you to make sure that you get Mrs. Jones out to the courtyard there. So it takes enthusiasm on the part of the provider. And I think that I hope that I was able to provide some of that with some of this. There's a great book called The Nature Fix by Florence Williams, if you want a longer read about this. But that this stuff works, and that the data is there, and it takes an enthusiastic provider. There are a number of different organizations in Alberta. There's an organization. Her name is, oh shoot, I don't have a tip. I can provide it to you. Who does programs for folks as well?
Sounds really good. I think how you started off your presentation and how you linked arms with our previous presenters. And you referred and you shared a story about your daughter. I thought that was really enlightening. And so thank you for saying, culture is medicine. I think that shares many sentiments that we're still learning more about, and we're trying to do do things differently. And so even asking what makes you happy, what brings you joy, that's an opportunity to listen more, to not look at just the surface and to dive a little bit deeper. So your prescriptions that you mentioned, is there an opportunity for some of us to connect with you if we want to get more information? I don't want to put you on this.
Yeah, you certainly can. I mean, what I do is I just looked up online, where can I order prescriptions? I could, and I just, $50 got me 500, and it was the best $50 I've spent. But I could, feel free to email me, and I can pass along a copy of one of the images, and then you can, and at that point you have to figure out a a place to get them printed. But like as an institution, if you're in an apartment, or you, I think it's an invaluable resource to be able to give these, beyond the medicine for prescriptions for being outside, there's the prescriptions for touch, right? And there's prescriptions for what I always write on all these is spread the love. I said, there's no better medicine than love. Your grandma was right.
Mm. Mm.
And, and then I usually tear up and give my patient a big hug.
Hmm. That therapeutic relationship sounds to be very important for you. And I'm just thinking maybe when you were referring to that Alberta organization, I don't know if you were referring to Prescription to Get Active, but I know that that's an organization that we would write, just recommending folks to get active, and it would link arms with some of our leisure centers in the major cities. But I hope this spurs on many of those listening right now to the small things make a difference, but also the big opportunities for us to learn more, to keep learning, to research. So Dr. Haas, did I get it right?
Got it right.
Wonderful. I am a big proponent of language, so thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us, and thank you again for the pivot, for taking a little bit of time off, but it was meaningful and it was valuable. So we wish you wonderful time in Croatia, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and like I said, the what you guys are doing here is fabulous work, and I think that the less damn pills we can give people, the better. As of someone who gives pills out 1 million times a day. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Blessings to you all.
Wonderful. Take good care. Thanks.
Bye-bye.